The aroma of seared garlic and fresh basil greeted me as I pushed open the door to La Bella Tavola. The restaurant's warm, inviting ambience did little to calm the storm inside me. It was ironic, really, this was supposed to be my favorite place, a sanctuary where I could escape the mundane grind of daily life. But tonight, the restaurant felt like enemy territory. Beth had suggested dinner here earlier in the week. At the time, I thought she was trying to rekindle something between us, a spark that had dimmed over the years. But now, as I sat across from her at a corner table, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this wasn't about us at all. "Mark," she began, her voice honeyed, but her eyes darted nervously toward the kitchen. "I wanted tonight to be special. A chance for us to reconnect." I nodded, though her words felt hollow. Reconnect? She hadn't been herself in weeks. The late nights, the guarded phone calls, the evasive answers to simple questions, it was like she'd become a stranger. And then there was her newfound fascination with this restaurant. She'd been dining here with friends, or so she claimed, at least 3 times a week. I didn't know what was worse, the lies or the poorly concealed guilt behind them. As the waiter brought us wine, Beth's unease deepened. Her eyes flicked to the door leading to the kitchen, and her hand trembled slightly as she lifted her glass. "What's going on, Beth?" I asked, my voice steady but firm. "Why did you insist on coming here tonight?" She hesitated, swirling her wine as if searching for the right words. "I just thought, we could use a night out. A chance to remember what we love about each other." Her answer didn't satisfy me, but before I could press further, the chef emerged from the kitchen. Chef Antonio himself, a charismatic man with salt and pepper hair and a confident swagger, strode toward our table. His eyes lit up when he saw Beth, and a grin spread across his face that felt too familiar for my liking. "Ah, Beth." Antonio greeted warmly, ignoring me entirely. "So good to see you again." Beth's cheeks flushed as she smiled nervously. "Antonio, this is my husband, Mark." Finally acknowledging me, Antonio extended a hand. "Ah, the lucky husband. Pleasure to meet you." I shook his hand, his grip firm and a little too lingering. "Likewise," I said, my tone as cool as I could manage. As Antonio returned to the kitchen, I leaned in closer to Beth. "How do you know him?" She avoided my gaze, busying herself with her wine. "He's just the chef here. I've met him a few times when I've come with friends." I didn't believe her. And as the night wore on, the puzzle pieces started to come together, her insistence on dining here, Antonio's too warm greeting, her skittish demeanor. Something was going on, and I was determined to find out what. But when I overheard Antonio whisper to the waiter, "Make sure she gets the special tonight," the knot in my stomach tightened. Who was she? And why did he look directly at Beth when he said it? I wasn't sure what I'd uncover, but one thing was clear, this wasn't just another dinner date. I sat back in my chair, my appetite gone, though the scent of roasted tomato and freshly baked bread tempted me. Beth picked at her salad, her fork moving aimlessly across the plate. She was distracted, no, nervous. I studied her closely, the way she avoided eye contact, how she flinched every time a server passed by. Antonio's comment about the special echoed in my mind. My instincts told me it wasn't just a culinary treat. Something else was simmering beneath the surface, something unsavory. The waiter arrived with our entrees, placing a beautifully plated dish in front of Beth, a luscious risotto with scallops, saffron, and a garnish of edible flowers. Her face lit up with a mix of surprise and something else. Guilt? Gratitude? I couldn't quite place it. "And for you, sir," the waiter said, setting a steak down in front of me. It looked perfect, but I barely acknowledged it. My attention was fixed on Beth as she took her first bite of the risotto. A soft, involuntary sigh escaped her lips. "This is amazing," she murmured, her voice dreamy. Antonio appeared again, this time with 2 glasses of sparkling wine. He set them on the table with a flourish. "Compliments of the chef," he said, his eyes lingering on Beth. "I wanted to make tonight unforgettable." Beth's hand brushed against the stem of the glass but didn't lift it. Her smile was tight. "Thank you, Antonio. That's very kind." Antonio gave her a knowing smile before disappearing into the bustling kitchen. "Beth," I said, leaning forward. "What's going on between you and Antonio?" Her fork froze midair. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean. The looks, the whispers, the special. Do you think I don't notice?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "You're being ridiculous, Mark. He's just a friendly chef. A chef who seems to know you well enough to send a personalized dish to the table. A chef who barely looked at me all night." Beth's expression hardened. "You're reading too much into it." "Am I?" I asked, my voice low. "Because it feels like there's something you're not telling me." She pushed her plate away, her appetite apparently gone. "This was supposed to be a nice night out. Why are you ruining it?" "Because I can't sit here pretending everything is fine when it clearly isn't." I snapped, my voice rising. "Why don't you just admit what's going on?" Beth's eyes flicked around the room, embarrassed by the attention our exchange had drawn. "Keep your voice down," she hissed. "You're making a scene." "I'll stop making a scene when you start telling the truth," I said, my voice steadier now but no less intense. "How often have you been here with Antonio?" "Mark, stop it," she pleaded. But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. She was hiding something, and she knew I could see right through her. Before she could answer, Antonio reappeared, a clipboard in hand. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his tone smooth, his gaze locked on Beth. "Fine," she said quickly, but her voice cracked. Antonio looked at me, his expression inscrutable. "Perhaps a digestive on the house? Something to ease the tension?" "No," I said sharply. "I think we're done here." I stood and threw a few bills on the table, more than enough to cover the meal. "Come on, Beth." But she didn't move. Instead, she looked at Antonio, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and regret. Something unspoken passed between them, and I felt my chest tighten. "Beth," I said again, my voice cold. "Let's go." Finally, she rose, her shoulders slumped. As we walked toward the door, I glanced back at Antonio. He was watching us, his expression calm, almost amused, as if he knew something I didn't. Outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap. I stopped by the car, turning to Beth. "This isn't over." "Not by a long shot." She didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at the restaurant door as though she was leaving something, or someone, behind. The ride home was suffocatingly silent. Beth sat stiffly, staring out the window, her arms crossed as if they could shield her from the weight of my questions. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles pale against the dark leather. The sound of the engine was the only thing breaking the silence, and even that felt too loud. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Are you going to tell me what's going on, or do I have to drag it out of you?" "There's nothing to tell, Mark," she said flatly, her gaze never leaving the darkened streets outside. "That's a lie, and we both know it." My voice was firm, but inside, I was unraveling. "You've been acting strange for weeks. You're always at that restaurant, and tonight, Antonio acted like he knew you better than I do. What's really going on, Beth?" She turned toward me, her eyes flashing with anger. "Why can't you just let it go? Not everything is a conspiracy. Let it go." I laughed bitterly. "You expect me to sit there, watching you and that man exchange secret looks and whispered words, and just, let it go? I'm not blind, Beth. I see what's happening." She opened her mouth to respond, but then closed it, shaking her head. "You're being paranoid. No, I'm being your husband, and I deserve the truth. Her silence was louder than any confession. When we pulled into the driveway, I turned off the engine but didn't move. Neither did she. For a moment, we sat in the darkness, the tension between us so thick it felt like a third person in the car. Finally, she sighed. Mark, I. Before she could finish, her phone buzzed in her purse. She hesitated, glancing at me before pulling it out. I caught a glimpse of the name on the screen before she quickly flipped it over, Antonio. My chest tightened. Answer it. She didn't move. Answer it, Beth, I repeated, my voice cold. Her fingers trembled as she swiped to decline the call. It's late. It's nothing. Nothing? I asked, my voice rising. He's calling you at nearly midnight, and you expect me to believe it's nothing? Mark, please. I cut her off, my patience gone. No more excuses, Beth. I'm done playing games. Either you tell me the truth, or I'll find it out myself. Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked away, her face pale, her breathing shallow. The phone buzzed again, and this time, she didn't try to hide it. Fine, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll tell you the truth. My heart pounded as I waited for her to continue. She took a deep breath, her hands clutching her purse as though it were a lifeline. Antonio and we've been talking, she admitted, her voice shaky. Talking? I echoed, my disbelief palpable. About what, Beth? Recipes? Wine pairings? Or is it something more? It's not what you think, she said quickly, but her eyes betrayed her. It's just, he's been kind to me, Mark. He listens. He understands things I can't explain to you. I laughed bitterly. So, you confide in a chef? Behind my back. Do you hear how ridiculous that sounds? It's not ridiculous, she snapped, her anger flaring. You don't know what it's like, Mark. To feel invisible. To feel unwanted. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Unwanted? I said, my voice breaking. Beth, I've spent our entire marriage trying to show you how much I love you. How could you feel unwanted? She looked down, tears glistening in her eyes. I don't know, Mark. I don't know why I feel this way. But Antonio, he made me feel seen. Like I mattered. I leaned back in my seat, stunned. The woman I'd loved for over a decade, the mother of my children, was sitting beside me, confessing her emotional connection to another man. A connection that, no matter how innocent she claimed, felt like the deepest betrayal. Do you love him? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head vehemently. No. No, I don't love him. It's not like that. Then what is it, Beth? I demanded, my frustration boiling over. What am I supposed to do with this? She didn't answer, her silence speaking volumes. I opened the car door, stepping out into the cool night air. This conversation isn't over, I said, slamming the door behind me. As I walked toward the house, her phone buzzed again. This time, she didn't try to silence it. I didn't have to look back to know who was calling. I couldn't sleep. The night stretched endlessly as I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen the only sound in the house. Beth had gone to bed hours ago, retreating to our room without another word. Her silence was deafening, a void filled with unanswered questions and rising suspicions. Her phone call with Antonio lingered in my mind, and I couldn't stop wondering what they had been saying to each other over the past weeks. Was it harmless, as she claimed? Or was it something deeper, something that threatened to unravel everything we'd built? At 2 a.m., I gave up on trying to sleep and rose, padding softly to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water, staring out the window into the quiet street. The faint glow of Beth's phone caught my eye. She'd left it on the counter, unlocked. For a moment, I hesitated. I'd never snooped through her things before. Trust was the foundation of our marriage, or at least, it had been. But tonight, trust felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. My hand hovered over the phone. One swipe, and I could have my answers. Or I could be opening a door I wasn't prepared to walk through. The thought of finding something damning made my stomach churn, but not knowing was worse. I swiped the screen, revealing a string of notifications. Missed calls. Text messages. All from Antonio. One stood out, sent just after she'd gone to bed. I need to see you. Tomorrow night. Come to the restaurant after closing. The words burned into my mind. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. What could he possibly need to see her for after hours? My heart raced, my mind conjuring scenarios I didn't want to believe. I heard the soft creak of floorboards behind me and turned to see Beth standing in the doorway, her robe pulled tightly around her. Her eyes went wide when she saw me holding her phone. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I should be asking you that," I said, holding up the screen. "What's this about?" Her expression shifted from shock to anger. "You went through my phone. How could you? How could I?" I repeated, incredulous. "You're the one sneaking around with another man. He's asking to see you tomorrow night after hours, Beth. Care to explain?" "It's not what you think," she said, her voice trembling. "Antonio he needs help with something personal." "Something personal?" I scoffed. "And that requires a secret meeting in an empty restaurant?" She crossed her arms, her gaze defiant. "You don't understand, Mark." "You're right," I said, my voice rising. "I don't understand. I don't understand why my wife is sneaking around with a man who clearly wants more than a casual friendship. I don't understand why you'd risk everything we have for this." Beth stepped forward, her voice softening. "Mark, I swear to you, it's not like that. Antonio, he's going through something. He confided in me because he doesn't have anyone else. And I'm supposed to believe that?" I asked, my tone dripping with disbelief. "Why you, Beth? Why not one of his staff? A family member? Why is my wife the one he turns to?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The silence stretched between us, heavier than before. I shook my head, setting the phone down on the counter. "I can't do this anymore, Beth," I said, my voice hollow. "If you won't tell me the truth, I'll find it out myself." Her face fell. "Mark, please." "No," I said, cutting her off. "You made your choice. You chose him, whatever this is. Don't expect me to just stand by and let it happen." I walked past her, heading back to the couch. As I settled into the cushions, I heard her soft sobs retreating down the hallway. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But it was drowned out by the anger and the gnawing suspicion that I hadn't yet uncovered the full truth. Tomorrow, I decided, I would follow her. If she was going to meet Antonio, I needed to know what was really going on. The next evening, Beth was restless. She flitted around the house, checking her phone and glancing at the clock. Her nerves betrayed her, though she tried to mask them with casual conversation. But I knew where she was headed. And so did she. "I'm meeting Lisa for coffee," she said finally, her voice overly bright. She grabbed her purse and avoided my gaze. "Don't wait up." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Have fun." As soon as the door clicked shut, I grabbed my jacket and keys. Beth's excuses had worn thin, and tonight, I would see the truth for myself. I followed her car from a safe distance as she drove through town. The streetlights cast long shadows, and I felt like a ghost, unseen but ever present. My heart pounded with a mix of anticipation and dread as she passed the coffee shop where Lisa supposedly waited and continued down the road. When her car pulled into the small parking lot behind La Bella Tavola, my suspicions solidified. I parked a block away and walked toward the restaurant, staying in the shadows. Beth entered through the back door, which Antonio held open for her. They exchanged a look I couldn't quite decipher before disappearing inside. The restaurant was dark, save for a faint glow emanating from the kitchen. I crept closer, my footsteps silent on the cobblestones. Through the slats of the partially open blinds, I could see them in the kitchen. Antonio leaned against the counter, a glass of wine in his hand, while Beth stood opposite him, her arms crossed protectively. I couldn't hear their conversation, but their body language spoke volumes. Antonio gestured animatedly, his movements passionate and deliberate, while Beth nodded, her expression conflicted. I strained to catch fragments of their conversation as the door to the kitchen cracked open. "This is getting dangerous," Beth said, her voice low but urgent. "I don't think I can keep doing this." "You don't have a choice," Antonio replied, his tone firm but not unkind. "Not if you want to protect him." "Protect who?" The words sent a chill down my spine. What could Antonio possibly hold over her that would compel her to sneak around like this? I moved closer, careful not to disturb the loose gravel underfoot. Through the slightly open door, I caught more of their exchange. "Beth, listen to me," Antonio said, stepping closer to her. "You knew the risks when you got involved. But if this gets out, it's not just me who'll suffer, it'll destroy everything you've worked for." Beth shook her head, her voice trembling. "I didn't know it would go this far. I thought I could handle it." "Handle what?" The words swirled in my mind, each one a piece of a puzzle I couldn't yet solve. Antonio stepped even closer, his voice softening. "I care about you, Beth. More than you realize. That's why I'm trying to fix this, for both of us." Beth turned away, wiping her eyes. "It's not just about us, Antonio. It's about him. He's innocent in all of this." My stomach churned. Who was he? Was there another man involved? A secret that Beth had kept hidden from me for years? Before I could process the implications, Antonio moved toward the door. I ducked back into the shadows, my heart racing. "Let me lock up," he said. "We can talk more in the office." Beth nodded, following him deeper into the restaurant. I stayed frozen, my mind spinning with questions. What had I just witnessed? Was this an affair, or was something far darker at play? One thing was certain, whatever was going on between Beth and Antonio, it wasn't just about them. There was a third player in this twisted game, and I intended to find out who it was. After they disappeared into the office, I slipped closer to the building, peering through a narrow gap in the blinds. Antonio pulled out a small, weathered envelope from a drawer, handing it to Beth. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing a photograph. Her sharp intake of breath was audible even from my hiding spot. "Where did you get this?" she demanded. "I told you, I have connections," Antonio replied. "And if you don't do as I say, Mark will find out everything." Beth's face paled. "He doesn't need to know. I'll fix this." She stuffed the photograph back into the envelope, but not before I caught a glimpse, a young boy, maybe 7 or 8, standing beside Antonio, smiling. I staggered back into the shadows, my mind reeling. Who was the boy? And why did Beth look like her entire world had just crumbled? Whatever was unfolding, it was far more complicated, and far more dangerous, than I'd imagined. I couldn't sleep that night, the image of the boy's face etched into my mind. Who was he? Why did Beth seem so desperate to keep him a secret? And how was Antonio involved? The next morning, I decided to confront Beth. As she sipped her coffee, her eyes red from lack of sleep, I dropped my question like a hammer. "Who's the boy in the photograph?" Her hand froze mid-air, the mug trembling slightly. What are you talking about? Don't lie to me, Beth. I saw you last night. At the restaurant. With Antonio. And the photo. Her face drained of color, and she set the mug down with a soft clink. Mark, Don't, I interrupted, my voice low and firm. Don't make this worse by lying. Just tell me the truth. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. Finally, she sighed, her voice barely above a whisper. His name is Luca. He's Antonio's son. The words hit me like a punch. Antonio's son. What does that have to do with you? Beth's eyes filled with tears. Because he might be my son too. My breath caught in my throat. The room seemed to tilt, the ground shifting beneath me. What? I managed, my voice strangled. It was before we got married, she said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. I didn't know for sure, Antonio and I had a brief thing. I didn't even know about Luca until recently. And now he's blackmailing you? I asked, my voice rising with anger. Beth nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. He said if I don't help him, he'll tell you and Luca. I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew, now a stranger tangled in a web of lies. I need time to think, I said, grabbing my keys and leaving before the rage and heartbreak consumed me completely. I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to piece together the fragments of my life that had been shattered in an instant. Beth's confession lingered, each word cutting deeper. By the time I returned home, the house was quiet. Beth sat at the dining table, staring blankly at the photograph of Luca. I'm not letting him control us, I said, breaking the silence. Her head snapped up. Mark, No, I interrupted. You made your choices, and now we deal with the consequences. Together. But Antonio doesn't get to manipulate our lives. She looked at me, hope flickering in her eyes. What are you going to do? Confront him. That evening, I walked into La Bella Tavola as the restaurant was closing. Antonio was alone in the kitchen, polishing wine glasses. He didn't seem surprised to see me. Mark, he said smoothly, setting the glass down. I wondered when you'd show up. I know everything, I said coldly. And I'm here to end this. Antonio smirked. Do you? Because I don't think you know as much as you think. He pulled a folder from beneath the counter, sliding it toward me. Inside were documents, paternity tests, legal notices. Beth didn't tell you the whole story, did she? I skimmed the papers, my stomach sinking. Luca wasn't Antonio's son. He was mine. She thought she was protecting you, Antonio said, his voice calm. But she's been protecting me. Luca's mother left years ago, and Beth helped me keep him safe. You have no idea the sacrifices she's made for you. I stared at him, my emotions a tangle of fury and confusion. Why the blackmail? I was desperate, Antonio admitted. The restaurant is failing, and I needed leverage. I knew Beth would do anything to keep the truth from you. I clenched my fists, rage bubbling to the surface. You're a coward. Antonio shrugged. Perhaps. But now you know the truth. What will you do with it? I left without another word, my mind racing. At home, I told Beth what Antonio had revealed. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't know how to tell you, Mark. I was scared you'd leave me. I'm not leaving, I said, though my voice was heavy with pain. But things will never be the same. In the weeks that followed, I filed a restraining order against Antonio and began rebuilding trust with Beth. It wasn't easy, but for Luca's sake, and our other children, we started over. Some secrets, I learned, can destroy. Others, if faced head-on, can rebuild what was broken.